comes to journal selection is really important. And then, of course, there's global journals we all know, but then there's really high quality regional, if not national journals that might be a great venue as well to consider when submitting a journal or submitting an article, I mean. And then timing's important too. This is something that's being shared more and more is review speed and turnaround time. You can see here, in the past you had to look at how quickly they published, how quickly the volumes turn around. But I think what you're seeing more and more is that they're sharing information that how long does it take to expect an answer, and that can really drive your decision because from a research standpoint, maybe you need to complete a PhD and get published by a certain time. In my work in medicine, maybe you're bringing a new drug to market and you need to publish before a competitor's drug launches. All sorts of different things you might need, to drive a timeline. So that's another consideration. You don't want to spend a year in peer review waiting for things to be decided one way or the other. So I think that's another really key variable to look at. And then lastly, a lot of these journals are very expensive, unfortunately. So you can see, that might be a deciding thing is how much money do you have to spend and where you can go with the journal. So I think that's another thing to weigh as well. Many of these journals charge by the number of pages, or if you're going to have things in color, all sorts of things. So, many of them do have policies where you can ask for those fees to be waived if it's a problem, but it's something to be aware of, and it can be a barrier, unfortunately. You can see here with this journal, they have, depending on different countries, they have different fee structures. Another thing to be aware of when we talk about open access journals is that they're not all the same. Some open access journals are truly open access. Some of them are subscription based, so while they don't charge per article, maybe the institution or the library has to pay a subscription to allow for that open access. And some of them are more hybrid depending on the type of article. So just something to be aware of as you're researching journals is that they're not all exactly the same when they use that term open access. So here's that checklist I mentioned, and I hope it's helpful. I know we're going to be sharing these slides coming out of today's call, but just to kind of recap some of the things that we discussed that might be helpful, or you could share with people in your lab or your mentors. But things like journal metrics, the visibility, and we'll get in a little bit more about some of these indexes when it comes to PubMed and Web of Science and things like that. Publication time and frequency is something to look at. Some journals publish every 2 weeks. Some journals publish every quarter. So there's a lot of different options there when it comes to frequency. And of course, we discussed acceptance rate and the peer review process and how selective some journals are. So just things to think through in this checklist. And then, of course, we discussed cost and ultimately, too, the pre-submission formatting can be a big barrier. How much work they're making you do to make it just like the way they like it and the different ways they want the reference list formatted and all those barriers as well. Many of these journals have websites, so I really strongly recommend taking a deep dive into this, particularly around the instructions to the authors. I think unfortunately many journals will reject you for just the formatting and making sure you have the right sections, even before they kind of dive into the science. So spending time there, making sure that you're not giving them a reason to reject you out of hand, to make sure you're following those instructions is important. A few other things to look at as well is in the details is things like copyright or your ability to have a supplement or appendix. These might be really important. Also, the requirements to sharing materials. Do they need, say you're in medicine, do they need to share a lot of patient data or consent data? How many authors they're allowed? That's another important thing that might be a challenge if you have a big clinical trial. And of course, things like the number of pages, use of color, and then also the timing of when the journal will be available. If it's immediate open access upon publication, if there's an embargo, which kind of a delay period, that can also be important things to just be knowledgeable about and understand as you're going through this process. And then, like most things in life, if you don't know, ask. So I think be in communication with the editor, really understand what they're looking for, that you're thinking about submitting to their journal, getting examples. The editors really want you to be successful, so I think talking to them is important and can be very helpful. So remember, just because you are encouraged to submit doesn't guarantee the paper will be accepted or even reviewed. So I think that's something too as you're talking with editors. Okay. A few other things here, journal search resources. Um, as have with some of these slides, there's so many journals that are out there, it can be very challenging. So one thing, if say I was running a lab and had, PhD students or something like that, graduate students, is have them create a short list of journals based on their area of expertise. So I think that this is a great way to kind of understand that space and to build familiarity with it. So there's some great tools that are out there. Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar. Of course, there's things like PubMed as well. And each one has their own focuses. So, Web of Science is great for the social sciences, the humanities. And they cover a range of different journals there, as you can see. And they have their own strengths. They're really well known um, in terms of what they share when it comes to the metrics and ranking. Um, in my line of work, Scopus is more commonly used for the health sciences. And the types of journals they look for. What's nice is you're able to search books in some of these options, which I think is new, as well as conference papers. And then Google Scholar, of course, also allows for books, but also allows for things like dissertations. Patents is important if you're developing a technology or an equipment. And it's a great way to find more obscure references. So just things to be aware of in terms of the pros and cons of each of these tools, but they're very valuable in terms of researching journals. Here's some just screenshots of what that looks like. Here's the Web of Science. And you can really find the right types of journals, what they're looking for. So you can see here, it gives you the impact factor, how much it matches to what you're looking to publish about. And you can then, learn more about the individual journals. Here's another search engine tool that allows you to kind of put in your title. This is from Springer, and you're able to actually get matched with certain journals that are appropriate, and they'll give you the impact factor. Let me give you the acceptance rate. So really, I think things have advanced a lot in the last 15, 20 years when it comes to journal identification and finding the right home for your research. And these cover a range of topics. I think I always put everything through the lens of medicine, but everything from chemistry to mathematics to social sciences can be used on these tools. Here's some other examples of kind of the output as they suggest journals for you to consider. And what I really like is they give you the first decision days, so you can actually plan out. Okay, well, if I get rejected here in a month, where do I go next? And you can kind of have a plan as you build out, how to get your manuscript accepted and have a reasonable sense of timing of when that might occur. Some other third-party tools as well are out there outside of the publishers, and these might be a little bit more. They give you a wider range, not just for that. The last example was mostly Springer journals because it was Springer's search tool. So that's some nice tools, and I'm sure these will continue to advance with AI. You'll be able to upload probably your whole manuscript in time, not your abstract, and get great matches. So continue to advance in this space when it comes to optimizing the journal for the research. And some other screen grabs here. All right, and then of course all of these journals then allow you to track your submission in terms of how it's progressing. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. So let me jump ahead a little bit here. And I'd love to get into the predatory journal part. Sorry, was that a question, John? Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the predatory. And I think we have a good sense now of kind of what good looks like, how you can identify appropriate journals, but the other side of the coin, the bad side is there are predatory journals. And I know that can be a real problem. So let's talk about how to recognize them and kind of protect ourselves. So what is predatory publishing? Um, Unfortunately, it's a scam essentially. It's a business practice in which authors are you pay your standard processing fees, but then you don't receive all the things that a journal typically does. They might still publish you, they might still put it up on the website or something like that, but they're not doing that full peer review. They're not doing that traditional publishing services of a standard journal in terms of ensuring quality. They just want to get the fees as much as possible. They will, many of them, they will publish you, and you'll be able to be up on the internet, but what does that really mean, right? Like I said, they're not doing that journal. They're difficult to trace, and there's many of them out there. I think the number I've seen is something like over 10,000 journals publishing something like 4 million articles. Unfortunately, many of them, um, you know, prey on, you know, researchers around the world who may be not as familiar with, the literature. Many of them are based out of India. And unfortunately, you can see here they really do focus on Asian authors and even Indian authors within India. So it's a real challenge because I think people are there's so much pressure on researchers that they're excited to have the opportunity to be published or they think is published, but then they kind of get taken advantage of. So really important to of, to be smart and protect yourself. Um, the other side of this too is if you do get published, it hurts your own credibility, right? You can't then go and take that same paper and resubmit it someplace. So you might have lost, years of research, and really might hamper your professional growth if you submit, your hard work in the wrong place. So, obviously science suffers because you're having, low quality journal being put out there that isn't going through peer review. It's just an unfortunate situation. Many of these journals, one of the key things I always say, if there's one thing you take away from today's talk when it comes to predatory journals, is regular journals don't reach out and invite you to submit. The Lancet or the Nature isn't knocking on your door. So many of these journals work by inviting you to submit papers, and they promise you things like rapid publication. A few other kind of signs that it might be a predatory journal is they have very large editorial boards and they're maybe spread all over the world. And because they're maybe even if they're made up names, they lie about that. And then they might have an impact factor that's also made up. But then when you go to check it, it's not listed in any of those tools we walk through when it comes to Web of Science. So you're not able to find them in any of the indexes. Um, Likewise, they might give you a physical location, but then you can't actually look it up, just like the impact factor. So I think that if you can identify journals that invite you, and then if you can't find them in any of the major databases, you can't look them up in Web of Science or Scopus, that is a red flag, something to look for. Google Scholar is easier to get listed. You kind of can pay for that. But these other things like Web of Science and Scopus are, they're really high quality search tools. So I think that's your best defense is avoid invitations and be sure to look them up in the databases. And you can identify many of them that way. Here's an example of one of these invitations that, I was thinking it's too good to be true. They're offering rapid publication. They're making it too easy, unfortunately. Um, so I think that's something to be aware of and to really do your due diligence and research. There is a tool I wanted to make sure everyone had. It's called Beale's List, and that allows you to actually search for these predatory journals. So I think if you did get an invitation and you're doing that research and you can't find it in the databases, maybe you punch the name in here or the URL, and maybe you're able to identify it in the predatory journal database. So obviously they change their names all the time, so it's not 100% reliable, but it might be a nice tool or another way to defend yourself against this sort of thing. And they have a whole list alphabetically, and also by area. I always tell people, before you do this, think, do your work, do that check, and then submit. I think don't be tricked into being too good to be true. And follow that. There's a nice checklist here. Are you submitting your research to a trusted journal? Is it the right journal? I think even within legitimate journals, you really want to do your work in terms of is it the right place? And talking with mentors, talking with colleagues, what do you think? Is this the right place for this type of work, both from a format but also from a content standpoint? And then checking, can you get in touch with the publisher? Are things indexed? Is it clear what they're going to charge you? Um, the editorial board, these should be really well-known people in your space. Um, in terms of, you should know who they are and recognize their own research. If you've never heard of any of these people, that can also be a concern. And then only when you go through that, then you can submit. So don't rush into things like many things in life. Um, let's also review a checklist for the submission package. I think this is important. Um, one of the things, unfortunately, as I said, when we started our talk, is that you want to make things easy for the editor to then move your journal, your article submission to peer review. So understanding the editor's job and not making it difficult for them. You want to catch their attention in a good way. So it's an example of one of the famous editors in chiefs of a research journal is, don't make things difficult. So many journals have very specific instructions for authors that we discussed in terms of the submission package when it comes to the cover letter, the title page. Nowadays, increasingly, keywords are important for searchability, and then, of course, the manuscript and tables and figures. And then also, increasingly, there's things like graphical abstracts and videos and social media and all sorts of things, supplemental materials. So make sure that you build that package as appropriately instructed so that the editor doesn't get tripped up on little things like formatting and allows you to focus on the quality research that you're sharing. A few things as well in the submission package to look for, and I'm sure Editage can help with this, is making sure your cover letter to the editor is very clear, concise, explaining what you're trying to do, that your title is captivating and engaging. They want to read it. The abstract should stand alone and really be clear as well. And then sometimes the figures and tables need to be kind of set off separate from the manuscript, to making sure that they clearly communicate the key results, and that there's no mistakes, there's no typos, grammatical errors. Making sure that you're able to clearly communicate what you're trying to say is really important. If we dive into some of these specific deliverables, the cover letter is kind of the first thing that the editor would read, and that will cover information about the main findings, the importance, some keywords. But ultimately, this fourth bullet's the most important. It's why are you submitting to that journal? What's the relevance of your research? And why are they a good fit? So talking through that is really important, as well as the conflicts of interest, if you have any. And then I think this is also important increasingly in like the world we live in with artificial intelligence, making sure that your manuscript is original, that it hasn't been published elsewhere. I mean, that's a big no-no. You don't want to submit to multiple journals at the same time. And it's not under consideration. I think that's really important as well. So here's a nice example. We'll share that with you, but really just explaining who you are, the title, the purpose of your paper, why it's novel, why it advances the scientific body of evidence, and then some statements as we mentioned before that it hasn't been submitted elsewhere. It's relevant, that sort of thing. But fortunately, every journal is a little different. Even within larger groups like Springer or Wolters Kluwer, every journal and editor has their own little nuances. So I think reading other papers that have been published, but then tailoring your manuscript to their instructions. Things like double spacing, between the sentences or font size. All of these things, you don't want them to be distractions or give them any reason to reject you. So I think being very careful with this, having someone sit down and double check your work, really important. And then also looking at the categories of articles. Many of these journals now will publish all sorts of different things, from opinion pieces to research to review articles. shorter form. So making sure that you're submitting in the right way, with the right format. Here's some further examples of different formats when it comes to analysis versus articles versus official comments. We're talking about the level of peer review, and then each of these, even within the same journal, might have different instructions and formats. So you can see here, obviously the comment wouldn't have something like an abstract, but maybe it does have references, or some other nuances there. So as you get into the different formats, there's different rules. So make sure you take the time to understand that and submit appropriately. Looking at the manuscript itself, some of the things we already covered, of course, when talking about the cover letter, but following the template, making sure you have the right article type identified, making sure that you're following character limits, um, and then providing complete and correct information. One thing I see a lot of folks get caught up on is citation and using endnotes and formats of this. There's all sorts of different things, the Vancouver system, Chicago style. It can be very confusing. So making sure that you're following past examples from that journal when it comes to citations and punctuation, that sort of thing. It can be as silly as parentheses versus brackets, but it's something that the journals take seriously, and it's an important thing to match. Here's another example of do you do the superscript before or after the period as well? So little nuances like this can be very important. Likewise, figures and tables. I think this is something increasingly, now that things are more digital, making sure that you have the right file size, megabytes, and resolution. Is it a vector file? The certain file types, but then also things like word counts for legends is important, and then labeling so they know where the different graphs or figures align to within a manuscript itself. And then also, of course, there's many journals have what's called supplementary or appendices, where you can include additional graphics and things like that that maybe wouldn't be printed in like the physical print version, but can live online. So as you build out your submission package, being aware of that and providing proper graphs and things like that can be critical. And then just a closing note here about some of these other items, the acknowledgments, author contributions, all of these things have to be done to have the journal be accepted to then move forward into peer review. Many of these portals and things like that won't let you even hit the button without completing all these sections. So things to consider, and all of these vary a lot by your area. Like I said, my background's in clinical medicine, so things like ethical reviews. Did it go through an institutional review board? Is it following appropriate protections on patient data and confidentiality, that sort of thing, and consent? All that needs to probably be submitted. Competing interests is also important. And all of this, I know it's a little, tedious, but it really the goal is to put your best foot forward and make sure that your work stands for itself and that you're not getting that opportunity because of things like formatting and punctuation, but that the great work and the great research that you're doing can really shine forward and be seen by the right folks. So just to get to a bit of a summary here, you really want to find a journal that matches what you're looking to accomplish, whether that's from a research standpoint, from a publication standpoint. And then you really need to focus on things like practical aspects. Everyone would like to publish in the most prestigious journals, but I think, looking at things like I said, budgets or timing or impact, all these things need to be aware of what's out there and what's possible. Of course, you want to avoid these predatory fake journals. We've gone over some tools, making sure that, looking at those invitations, looking at is it indexed, and things like the Web of Science. All of these can kind of help protect you so you don't run into those issues. And then as you do then move forward with your submission, really taking the time to double check things like your cover letter, your abstract, your formatting of your manuscript. All these are really critical steps so that the piece itself can be accepted and reviewed and really focused in on the science and not have these other things get in the way. So that was the extent of my prepared slides. I'd love to open the floor for conversation and questions. I know there's the chat function here. Happy to kind of take whether it's in English or if it's in Indonesian, have it be translated. But yeah, I really appreciated your time. I hope the lecture was useful. I tried to be very practical with some of the things we covered. But yeah, love to get thoughts. I know there's a number of people in the Zoom meeting, so we'll just kind of work through questions. I don't know, Joantius, if you want to kind of uh, share that with the group and kind of help me with translation, and we'll go from there.
Ya, Bapak Ibu sekalian, jika ada yang mau ditanyain, feel free kalau seandainya mau langsung dalam bahasa Inggris ke beliau bisa, tapi kalau seandainya mau dalam bahasa Indonesia juga bisa. Kita punya waktu lumayan panjang. Ya, Bu
Ya,
Sabrina. Pak Condro, saya serahkan ke Pak Condro ya, Pak ya.
ya,
Iya,
oke siap, Pak Juve. Silakan
thank
Bu
you.
Sabrina.
Terima kasih Pak atas waktunya. Yang mau saya tanyakan kepada Mister pembicara tadi ya, yang bule.
Pak
Um,
Daniel.
Kalau
Pak,
ya, Mister Daniel, if we already choose the journal
Mhm.
Scopus from Q1 until Q4, but um, in the middle of the time, in the middle of period, unfortunately, the journal stop become reputable, become Q that all Q. So what we should do, Mister, and how to avoid that uh,
No, I think I
accident.
understand. Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. So just to repeat, so I understand. So the a manuscript was submitted to one journal in Q1, and then by the end of the year, by Q4, the journal was seen as less reputable or had kind of slipped in the rankings, or I, I think I think that's a challenging situation. You always have the opportunity to pull a manuscript and to say, hey, I've decided not to have the journal, not to submit, publish with you. So I don't, happy to follow up and answer more questions, offline. But it seems like that might be a situation where, do you tell them, hey, I don't want to publish with you now, given the changes in maybe your
But how
editorial
to
board?
avoid that? Mhm.
Hmm. How do
So
we avoid that?
before we
Yeah,
yeah before we upload the manuscript to their journal.
yeah, it's
So
challenging
we
to
don't
know
have
ahead.
to.
I think it's really doing that research of, hey, does this journal have an established history? Does it have a track record, as they say? Like, do they, I think, I don't know the field or anything in terms of the specific journal, but, is, like more established journals aren't going to all of a sudden change or disappear overnight. So maybe this journal was really on the edge, and if maybe if you
Yeah.
if you could do more research in terms of its history and who's on its editorial board, you might be more confident and comfortable with kind of their reputability and how good of a journal it is. So you can avoid that challenge. But yeah, it's definitely a unique situation.
Thank you,
ya,
Mister.
No, great question.
oke.
I think I saw a few other
Thank
hands.
you, Bu Sabrina. Oke, Daniel, there is a comment from Arno Muwarni in meeting chat that some several of Bill's list may not be fair because a big journal with very high APC with no option or subscription choice, no APC or less cost feels like predator. How do you think?
So just so I'm clear, I think the question is if some of these journals they have such high costs, it almost feels like it's predatory. Yeah, no, I understand that. It's challenge. Look, I think even if a journal isn't predatory and they have high costs, I think you need to think about is it right for me? I mean, I don't know. Every country is different, every institution is different, but you only have the budget you have, right? You can't, you know, you don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend. So I think you need to say, like even a reputable journal can act in a way that's not fair. So I think in that case, I would say, look, it's just not a good match. Like there's a lot of it's like It's like dating, you need to look at all the different variables and finding the right partner. And it seems like in this situation, if it's so expensive and that it even if it isn't a predatory journal, it might not be the right fit.
Okay. Is there anything else from participant? Okay. Before we waiting for that, another question, Daniel, is that the question from Abu Sabrina the same, the condition with the what we
Hmm.
call it,
The journal. Hmm.
discontinuous journal? What do you
Yep.
think?
The same, sorry, the same question that she had. Um, yeah, I think, look, I mean, if we had a time machine, it could go back. I think it's doing the homework before that you avoid the journal, right? Like, and you can look at, there how much history there is and how established the journal is. But if you're in the situation she's in, I think, like I said, I don't know all the details, of course, but I would say, you maybe need to consider pulling the article and saying, look, this